All right, so this is building query for July 21, 2020, last one of the month. Quite a lot we can potentially talk about. We do have two new guests, so I want to make sure that we take care of the things that they're interested in, what brought them to the call. Namely, the release of 0910 on the back end and 043 on desktop. Casey had talked about, or Ramfox had talked about wanting to demo wrong version, desktop wrong version migration. And so we can put that on the agenda. And then I sort of, among the team, got an agenda item that might wait for like towards the end of the call with respect to like some very prospective wires when it comes to following and subscribing, but that doesn't mean we can't discuss it on the call first, but I recommend we do that a little later. Anything else big agenda item wise, either from the team or new guests who are sort of expressing an interest in what we're up to and curious what we're working on?
I mean, for myself personally, just, I mean, obviously y'all got your agenda to cover, but, you know, my interest was that, you know, part of my job is to figure out for our company how to build, how to build big accessible data sets. You know, we're spread across, you know, the Americas and a lot of data needs. So, and a lot of that, of course, is, you know, bringing open data into it. So, again, the idea of version controlled open data sets accessible through Python and R was certainly, you know, super keen. So, yeah, I mean, you know, if it's worth it for anyone else, you know, just a super short intro to kind of the schematic of Qri would be helpful for me. But I'm sure y'all know that now, but what your Qri does. But I would enjoy it if possible.
Perfect. That'll be the top of the agenda then.
Yeah, be happy to do that. And we could also sort of stop and personalize it to your use case if that's helpful. When you talk about big, if we can, big means different things to different people.
Sure. Right.
But yeah, we'd be happy to sort of just do the 5-minute, hey, here's what's going on. And then Jonas, you also.
Yeah. I only want to say, yeah, go ahead, Jonas. It looks like you unmuted, so look.
I watched your IPFS workshop in IPFS channel, so I'm just curious about the development of like encryption in dataset that I think P5 mentioned, right? And about the identity management in Qri. I'm just curious to see the development there. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So despite this being somewhat backwards, I think I would answer that question first because it'd be faster to answer than the demo, if that's cool for others. And Jonas, that way, hopefully, if you have any follow-up, we can sort of develop questions later and answer them as we go. So the story around encryption for Qri, the roadmap for encryption is obviously, we talked about it at the IPFS demo. For those who are unaware, Qri is built on top of IPFS, which stands for the Interplanetary File System. It's a decentralized file store. And so it stores data as immutable Merkle DAGs, which are these sort of content addressed blocks of data. And that's the way that Qri actually moves and coordinates data around. One of the big problems with, not problems, but like one of the things that IPFS doesn't give us out of the box is encryption. And so you can create data and you can add data to IPFS. But if you want that data to be encrypted, you actually have to do that yourself. And the encryption part is actually relatively trivial. I mean, you can use just like, if you really wanted to, you could string together command line tools to encrypt something and then just add the encrypted text to IPFS and then pass the data around. The challenge becomes, how do you build a system that is able to sort of like make the encryption layer transparent and add in access control? And so for a query, Jonas, you'd asked specifically about identity management and access control. And those are things that we are actually that are on the roadmap and are on their way to sort of being made, but we've been really laying the groundwork for them, for those sort of key features for the last little while. To give you a feel for how we actually build out these kind of things so that you're not just, so I don't just say soon. We have a RFC a process we call the RFC, which is a request for comments process. And if somebody on Qri wouldn't mind dropping a link, it's just qri.io/RFCs, all lowercase. And that's where the proposals get landed for this stuff. In this quarter, so before the end of September, the proposal for adding encryption and key management will land in the RFC sort of repository. And that's when we will actually formally open the debate on how are we going to do encrypted data sets and access control around it. That's sort of gives you a sense, hopefully, Jonas, of where we're at. Basically, we haven't even finished the proposal yet, but we have been building a number of pieces that we know that we're going to need for it. Specifically, the capacity to support multiple different types of storage persistence layers. So Qri now supports IPFS and a number of other things that we can plug in, including stuff like S3 is now on the roadmap as a place to store some of the stuff. And so it should be possible. We've heard from a number of users that it should be possible to create an encrypted data set, but write it to Amazon S3 or a different sort of centralized object store instead of IPFS. And then have Qri manage the coordination of the keys, the cryptography, and the access to those data sets and the actual versioning of it. And so that actually had to come first before we could build the encryption. We basically needed to figure out a way to do a multiplexing persistence sort of type thing, and that's now in place. The other thing that needed to come into place that has been a long time coming has been a lightweight layer for coordinating the histories of data sets instead of just the actual data set blocks themselves. We call that technology logbook, and that's basically an append-only log that describes changes users have made to data sets, and it moves those around in a very lightweight manner. And so that they're independent of the actual data itself, and so it allows you to understand, oh, there are 37 versions of this data set. These are the hashes or checksums of those data sets, and these are the sort of those versions, and these are the times that they were made and who they were made by. It's a very important primitive for both collaboration and for access control. Because if we're going to do access control, we need a way to actually measure changes in access control so that everybody can coordinate around it. So those two major pieces have landed. The next thing to do is put out the proposals around both exchange of keys, rotation of keys, and an encryption layer on top of our multiplex file system. So I anticipate the earliest we would see this actually landing in Qri would be sort of January, February next year, the absolute earliest. And that's an optimistic timeline. So when January of next year rolls around, you say, where's my encrypted data sets? We'll say, well, it's software and we're delayed. But we will do what we can. Jonas, does that give you anything helpful to go on? Or is
yeah, awesome. Awesome. Thanks for the clarification and explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really appreciated. If you have any interest in this, or if you have a dog in this fight, it would be great if you could comment on the RFCs, if you have any interest in sort of steering the way that we write the implementation. We have a very real tendency to honor the people that show up and argue about the actual implementation before it gets written. That's not everybody's cup of tea. Like, not everybody has the time or the schedule to sort of wait for things to get implemented, but we are open source projects, and that includes the roadmap of the project itself. And so we try to stick to that. But
okay.
Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
So Matthew, I think we can actually move on to a quick demo of Qri if that's helpful. What would be fun after this, we have also released a Qri Python command line client, or not Python client that works in Jupyter notebooks. Our story around RStudio is not the same, but we do write to CSV files, which is a pretty common sort of interchange format. But if you don't mind, I can demo for you really quickly the command line side of this. And
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share screen really quick, and we shall, let's see. Okay, 1 second here. Just got to clear off a desktop. Cool. Share screen. Does everyone see a terminal and relatively legible text? Cool, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Awesome. So the Qri command line client, what?
Make it bigger text.
Bigger, more, plus. Query, bigger? Let's go bigger.
One more time.
Bigger. 2 more times? Cool.
That's
that. Okay, so the challenge here now is we start to lose, our lines start to clip, but that's fine. So this is Qri. It's even already we're sort of in a big, but Qri is a dataset version control system. It does a lot of things at the same time, and so it's kind of got a new approach to some things, but these general network, or these general categories of commands sort of help us get an orientation. At its core, Qri versions, pushes around, pulls around, and works with data sets. And we have a very specific definition of a data set that we have documented quite extensively at qri.io/docs, which talks about what a data set is. And this also explains what is Qri. But the biggest thing that we really want to make sure that we clarify is that a data set is broken into components for us. And this, for us, we tend to think about data sets as sort of like a document, quote unquote, but it's the sort of, can we do the high level component overview? I don't know. Oh yeah, this is the component overview. But we have like a component for a lot of the common things that you associate with a data set. So we have a meta component, we have a README, which is, if we look at like Qri.cloud has a great example of some of this stuff in action. So we just finished working on the NYC transit data set. So we have like a meta component, which adds standard structured metadata. We have a structure component, which actually describes the sort of look and feel of it, or the actual sort of structure of the data set, which includes its schema description. It includes the format of the thing, of the actual data that it's being stored in. Qri supports CSV and JSON as its sort of primitives. It can do high dimensional data as well as sort of tabular formats. We get some basic things for free out of our structure when we commit a data set. Qri automatically counts the number of entries in the data set, and it actually computes the number of errors that exist in the data set according to the schema as defined. This is an important part of Qri in that we support data that contains errors. This is not a database in the classic sense where you have to get your data into an acceptable form before you can insert it. Qri will accept anything so long as it will parse. And so you can have lots of null fields, weird things, ragged edge CSVs, that's fine. The point is it's version controlled, so you can put it in at the beginning and clean it up over time. On top of that, we can define really, the schema description that you see here is quite, is intentionally the sort of high level human oriented view. You can get really specific with the schema definitions because Qri under the hood uses something called JSON schema for its actual schema descriptions. JSON schemas allow you to define all types of rules around how data should validate or behave. And that is a sort of separate spec that Qri just builds right on top of. It touches on a really common and important theme in Qri is we're aiming for both interoperability and not building new specs if we can avoid it. So when it came to schema definitions, we use the thing that actually OpenAPI is built on top of, which is called JSON schema. And then last but not least, the thing that all of these data sets are about we call the body, which sort of takes its inspiration from HTML, the body of a web page, the body of a data set. And that's actually the data. So in this case, we're seeing a preview, which is just the first 100 rows, but we actually know that there are 88,179. There is one other component in a Qri dataset that's different from your average, which is the commit. And commits show us actually obviously linked together to form a history. And so we can actually see commits over time. And just like if you've ever seen worked with other version control systems, Git's our usual sort of point of reference. We actually have hashes for every individual dataset version. So every version in Qri is immutable. Every version references its prior version that creates a chain of history. And so that's sort of the like top level view of what datasets look like and how they work on Qri. The command line client for actually creating one is, so we have a bunch of commands coming back here. Toughest thing I have to Zoom is moving all of your faces around while I'm bouncing around the screen. But we have dataset commands. We have something called working directory commands. This supports something called we call file system integration, which is making Qri behave like Git and allows you to check out a folder. That folder will stay sort of like locked to a version dependency, and it will allow you to type things like status, which will tell you if you've changed a certain component or if you haven't changed a certain component, which makes working with Qri a lot like Git if you want that experience. Unlike Git, Qri stores all of your data sets in one central place. And so there is something called a Qri repository, which has all of the data sets versions in it. It behaves much more like a database. And then on top of that, last but not least, Qri includes networking commands. So Qri can actually go online and move data sets around in a decentralized network. So we can actually do, we can push data sets to and from other peers. And we can also use this sort of central point of coordination we call the registry. Qri Cloud is the registry. So when you type Qri push for a dataset name, it by default pushes it to the cloud, which is this central place where you can get access to this data. And then we have some other like tiny commands that are sort of more plumbing oriented. But some notable things that Qri can do, Qri can run SQL directly on datasets. So we have, this is marked as an experimental feature because our implementation of SQL is not exactly Postgres or not exactly MySQL, and it's missing some key things. We're working on that all the time. You can also render visualizations and templates against internal datasets. And then we have like just the basics of being able to get data out of a dataset or out of a dataset and pieces of data out of a dataset. So in a general sort of like the usual sort of starting point for a query is Qri list, which just shows me the list of all the datasets that I have. And so for me, my username in this case is B5, and this is all the stuff that I have locally on my machine. And so if I want to, I can sort of, I get this quick overview of what's the name of the data set. This is usually its username / the name of the data set itself. That's how we sort of talk about data sets. The title, and then the latest commit hash. And so The fun thing about Qri is everything is stored on IPFS, and we'll kick this off while we wait. And I can actually often type ipfs.io/the hash that I was looking at. And this will actually show me the actual data on the decentralized web. And so this is completely independent of Qri, the application itself. What Qri does is create version data sets in a very highly structured manner and stores them to persistent stores like IPFS or S3. And so in this case, this data is just like, literally, here's the body, and you can literally just, this is the data set. And so if you have tools like R, or if any tool that can consume and output CSV files, Qri can work with it. And that's quite intentional. And so you don't need any special tools to interpret the data that Qri is spitting out. The whole idea is that it's JSON and CSV in common formats written in common ways. And we put a lot of the heavy lifting into the actual binary itself that authors and moves around the versions of data. So just to give a feel, I can do the classic just query get and NYC jobs. And this actually shows it to me in YAML output, but this is giving me a sort of like overview of the entire data set. I can also get just a subset of the data set itself. So I can name just the meta component. That'll give me just the meta component. And so now I can see that. Maybe if I prefer that in JSON and I want to pipe that to JQ, it's a command line tool, so we can do that, and it's pretty straightforward. Authoring data sets is also pretty straightforward. In this case, I'm working on a data set of hashing algorithms. So if I do body.csv, let's pretend that we just want to add, oh no, now I need to like actually know the name of a hashing algorithm that isn't on here. Well, we have Blake 2B, that's a thing. 2B, and let's just pretend this was written in 2015. This is bad data, so I'm committing many sins here in the data world, but let's pretend for the sake of demo, it's at blake2b.com. just go with me on this one. I'm gonna save that, and then the way that we save data sets in Qri is I would just run query save, and I'm gonna feed it the body, which is the file, and then I'm going to call it, and then I can use, instead of always having to type my own username, I can just type me, which is a shortcut for my username, and then the name of the data set name that I would like to save to. I hit save, and now it's saved. And if I do query get me/hash algos, we get, actually, let's do query get body me/hash algos. There you see with the Blake 2B. And then if I do query log me/hash algos, we can see that we have two versions. One was the one that I made earlier today at July 31st at 10:01 local time, and then here at 2:22 local time. You notice different from Git, Qri generates commit messages for you automatically if you don't provide them. This is intended for when you're wiring Qri up to pipelines. So if you have some system where it's spitting out data and just typing query save, there's no human in the loop there to actually give you the message, the commit message of what changed. And so Qri does an analysis of what changed between the two versions. In this case, it just says, hey, we added row 3 to the body. Gives you a nice sort of consistent and concise description. As the body gets larger, it starts measuring things in percentages. If you change the meta component, it'll tell you, hey, you just changed the meta. But the process of publishing that data is just query push me hash algos. As we mentioned before, this will by default push to the registry. And that will now take those blocks, send them up, put it up there. And if we go to query.cloud/v5/hash algos, I've never actually looked at this webpage, so hopefully it functions. Cool, and there's our Blake 2B hash, and it's published and up. And if I hit download, somebody can download the zip file of that data set, which includes all of the version data. We have all of the history available. And so you can actually see these two things. And so we think this is like one of the fastest and simplest ways to get data up in a way that is sort of your own personal data portal, something that you can just publish really easily and work with really simply. And that's sort of the like beginning of it. I can also just as easily get into some of the command line side of this of query SQL, select a star from v5 hash algos. And then I have to actually alias the table. So like as algos, it's an idiosyncrasy of our implementation. But if I do this, I actually get an SQL output of that. And so there's some fun aspects to that because we are typing SQL on top of a version control system. Under the hood, Qri knows what data sets that you're referencing, and it can actually look at data sets that I don't have and resolve them and fetch them for me, very similar to what like an NPM would do if I were trying to do. If I was in the world JavaScript world, I can type npm install and it will get me JavaScript packages just by their name. So for this example, I'm going to need a data set that I don't have. Hopefully somebody's published something recently. Let's go with 10 movies, different title. Okay, so I presently don't have ramfox/10_movies on my data on my local node. So if I do query SQL select star from ramfox_10 movies as 10 movies. Can I do that in SQL? Can I do underscores in
I don't think you need
column?
as.
Oh yeah, I don't need that either. Oh, okay, well, we'll take it away. But if I do this, pardon me, the power just died here, but
Oh my gosh.
ramfox 10 movies repo not found. Oh, that's not working today. Dang. Why isn't that working? Let's try it.
I will say that I just uploaded that as a test
Maybe you
and I
deleted
was
it.
messing with it heavily, so it might not be kosher.
The other
This
thing
isn't
is,
running.
while if you want to troubleshoot that, I'd love to just see if Matthew has any questions about that and learn a little bit more about his use case and the tooling that you use that we can, adapt whatever demo Brendan has left. Like,
Sure. Yeah. No, that was all incredibly helpful, and I really appreciate the time taken on this call to go through that. Yeah. I mean, I got a whole bunch of stuff whizzing around in my head about that. Potential uses and all the ways I can plug in. So as far as the use case, I mean, it's, so I can see there a title if you want, but that company AECOM that I work for is a large construction and engineering infrastructure company. So traditional kind of architecture, engineering, that sort of stuff, not a software company by any means.
Awesome.
So trying to build software company-like processes within a traditional hours and labor company is the challenge that my job is, which is an amazing and fun challenge for sure. But so it's like what those use cases are hardly cut and dry. We have really great small developer communities, data science communities in the company. The business unit I'm in is 20,000 people. So, there's a whole range of abilities in that and uses for data. But at the core of it, there are certain, data sets that either we create, we purchase, or a lot that just exists in the world, and that other people create, that are on here, that can influence our planning, studies, and stuff like that. Planning is a big part of it. Transportation planning, urban planning, resiliency stuff. So New York turnstiles is, that would be that. I mean, I think that was the data set from Chris that caught my attention, when I was scrolling through Twitter, and I was like, I want to see that. So stuff like that. So, my job's figuring out, at least strategy-wise, and kind of putting the components together of what is the data platform that I can serve out to thousands of people internally, that is, has API calls going out to wherever, pulling stuff in, and everything's just automatically kind of, working in the background to keep stuff fresh, as well as our internal stuff. So, of course, there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of ways you can do that. So the easiest, the kind of most direct connection to this is, API calls to curated data sets that, we can see and the version control and have some confidence and trust in is great. Having our own data sets that are, the whole idea of the data object with the metadata in version control is just like, well, that kind of takes it to the whole next level. It's like, okay, so, with that, because with all those people and all those different projects, of course, trust and we talk about, kind of capital Q quality, because everything we deliver to clients needs to be, a lot of it's, reviewed in court or by, different agencies and federal government stuff. So, there needs to be levels of transparency and kind of, audit trail to everything as well. So again, there's just a lot of ideas going on in my head of kind of how this can all fit into that. But the very basic case was just like, well, a place with curated data sets that we can, hit with an API and drag into, internal view.
Totally.
Yeah. So, and, I don't know if that was helpful or not, but
super helpful.
Yeah. But,
no, that's great. You mentioned at the top that you have lots of big data sets. Do you mind me just asking what's big to you? What's small to you?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. As you said, it's different to everyone. I think when I used whatever descriptor there, I was thinking like, the horizontal scale across all the people and the geography. The geography doesn't matter much, but the number of people and how different they are is kind of the big part to it. The data sets, I mean, they can range. Things we're working with currently are big ACS and census data sets, every block group in the country kind of thing.
Totally.
5-6 gig CSVs for stuff like that. I mean, we have, video libraries that are in, terabytes and whatnot, of course, but most of it's just big enough data.
Right.
Be a pain in the butt. That's where a lot of it lands. And as you can imagine, like tons of stuff's wrapped up in crazy like Excel tables now and everything that we need to kind of liberate. But the few hundred meg to a few gig CSV is not an uncommon
Perfect.
data product.
Yeah, that's actually really Qri's sweet spot. For us, we think about data that can fit on a laptop versus data that cannot fit on a laptop, and that's really the distinguishing point.
I like the phrase "big enough data." I feel like that's about where we land. Yeah,
exactly.
That's really great. And yeah, I mean, to that end, there's some aspects that we probably didn't talk about that might be useful to you. This sort of internal external barrier is a really common thing that we deal with a lot. Where we have a number of folks who have. And on that, we're making some active work on this notion of remotes, where there's sort of like, if you put it in 3 tiers, we have fully public, which is Qri's default settings. And then we have sort of a plurality of things that are in the open, but aren't like mission critical, don't contain personal information, where you maybe don't want to be publishing it to a website. You want to be pushing it directly to a sort of like a lab computer or central source that it maybe isn't the registry. That is always online, that others can work with, and individual sort of collaborators. So like you have colleagues. That's the next thing that is going to be landing, which is the sort of notion, we call those remotes, which is almost exactly the same as Git remotes. The big difference is you don't have to configure them. And so you can just say push, and then you name the user you want to push to. And so if you stand up a Raspberry Pi and say, okay, this is now inside of our office in Toronto, then you can just say push to the Toronto office box. And it will automatically sort of do that, and as long as the Toronto office box has said, I will accept data from this person, we're good.
Okay. You say that the cloud, Qri Cloud still acts as the register, but doesn't publish, or does the register now live on that remote?
On that remote, exactly. And so you can skirt around the sort of edges of this sort of hyper-public Qri Cloud space and just leverage Qri Cloud in that context for unique username enforcement, which is one of the biggest sort of like usage advantages. It's a bit of a problem in a decentralized system to like know that someone else isn't going to name themselves the same username as you. And then the sort of third and final tier that Jonas actually spoke to, was asking about, is sort of this next fully private, encrypted, like we actually are putting data in here that cannot escape or move out. And if it does, it absolutely can't be stored in plain text. And so that's sort of the final category. We reserve most of that for our actual work with large companies. That is something that we do we are both an open source company and a company. And a lot of our stuff is actually taking this entire system and running it internally. Where
really makes sense.
Yeah. And so that configuration by default is set up to have it work to only communicate with peers who are within the company. And so you can run a peer-to-peer network where the entire network is operating under a network fingerprint that will only communicate with other users that have the same fingerprint, which effectively creates a private network.
This might be a silly question, but again, kind of correlating it to Git. What about conflicts?
Merge conflicts, yes. So you'll notice that we didn't demonstrate anything that merges data. So this is actually an area of active research where we think that the idea of a 10,000 to 1 million row merge conflict is just untenable. And so we don't think we want to do it. We don't think that building a pull request that is the classic code sense makes sense. And so the stuff you'll see from us in the coming weeks around this is something called a change report, which is the idea of a summary of what's changed in a data set, not a cell-by-cell diff, which we can calculate on smaller data sets and are making more efficient all the time. But cell-by-cell diffs are doable in Qri. There's diff command, but there's but sometimes it can be so expensive to calculate that it's actually much more simplistic to just take the column statistics and compare those, and then do a net how many rows were added and removed between these two sort of data sets. To that end, we what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. So merge conflicts. Yes. So the current thinking for us is the way the Qri is set up is everybody, there is actually no notion of branching in Qri right now, although we have all of the primitives set up for it. So the way that you collaborate on a data set is I just take a data set and I just start making edits. And as soon as I make edits, Qri just creates a fork for you. And so it moves that same data set of that same name into your namespace. If your namespace already has something, it just appends it to that name. And you just start authoring your own history. And then if a user, our current thinking on this is just last writer wins. So if somebody comes up with what we now all agree should be the canonical head state of a data set, we can use diffing tools to diagnose whether that is the case or not. And then somebody just says, okay, I want to make this, and there is no actual conflict negotiation. It just says, make this new version the authoritative head of the upstream sort of version. That's the current thinking. We're by no means done that, but we're actually closer on that conversation than we are on private data.
Would that sort of sequence of events be captured in the commit histories, or is it only
Yes.
the commit histories of whoever? Okay.
It would absolutely be captured in the commit history, and it would show that this is the series of commits that happened, and then if you would like, you can point to this sort of specific point in time, which, because everything's written in an operational log that is append only, you can actually recreate the entire overall history of everything, both temporally and causally. Yeah, that's the general thinking right now, but it's just like we've been really working closely with users to understand what does merging version data look like, and it's sort of a new thing for us. And so the first thing we're going to get out the door is the notion of a change report. We're going to try and launch that on Qri Cloud in a very simplistic way, and then continue to evolve that as much as we can until we get it into a sort of modality where we all agree that it helps you understand what changed between two versions or across two data sets. Once we understand that, then and feel like we have that sort of wrapped up, we'll then move on to the idea of, cool, can I now apply what is effectively patch application, right? If you think about the earliest versions of Git, before it had the idea of a three-way merge or other merge strategies, there was just, hey, I take my code and I cut a patch and I say, please apply this patch. And that's effectively what we're sort of getting at, it just retaining the history.
Very cool. No, that's a perfect description. I really appreciate it. That's incredibly helpful.
Awesome. Also, Jerry, we have a new joiner. Welcome. Thank you for joining.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
But yeah, and then Rika, I think we covered everything. Jonas, I don't know if you had any questions about private data, or Matthew, if you had any sort of remaining questions.
No, I mean, you described it.
No, for now, no. Yeah.
Great, awesome. So Rico, we had one other thing on the agenda that I have completely forgotten since the beginning of this call.
I can turn it over to Casey if she's ready. She was going to demo.
Yeah, hi there.
Migration.
So recently on Qri, we just put out a new release of the front end and the desktop application. I'm sorry, the back end and the desktop application, which is very exciting. And one of the challenges that we had in desktop was the most recent releases of Qri required a migration of the back end, but we had no way of communicating that to the user. So we spent some time with ensuring that the desktop application makes sure that you are running the correct version of Qri that it is associated with, and that also any migrations that happen under the hood were correctly communicating to the user. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly and just do a quick little demo here of what that might look like. So I'm currently using a repo that is called Demo. And if I look at the Qri version I have here, it's 0.9.8, which is actually a bit out of date. So Mr. or Mrs. Demo has not been keeping up with the latest Qri. And then I'm going to launch the desktop. I have to use the dev version because the release version does a lot of this work for you. So I wouldn't be able, I'd have to break it in order to show you this demo. So that's why I'm currently running a dev version. When that launches up, it'll show you some of the action here. I'm gonna have the same problem with moving stuff around. Okay. So right now, incompatible backend, we can communicate, hey, we support version 9.10, but you're running version 9.8, and this should actually be a major issue if this is happening on a release. So please file an issue here and yell at us. Okay, now I'm going to actually install the latest version of Qri, which is version 0.9.10. I'm doing it from source. If you wanted to go download Qri, you should head to our website. Someone wants to put a link to like the best place to download Qri in chat, that would be great. So I'm gonna wait for this to install, and the version 9.8 was the last version that used an old Qri, the old version of the Qri repo. So now I'm gonna demonstrate how we're showing to the user, hey, we're migrating for you, and yeah, what that experience is like. So let me just let it launch for a second. And yeah.
This new version will resolve the IPFS lock problem.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're glad. That was a lot of work.
Well,
Okay,
it took a lot of work to figure out what the hell was going on when I couldn't launch desktop. So thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's all good. Man.
Bad error handling on our end.
It was all good. I figured it out.
So yeah, we're just migrating. Takes a bit because we have to download some tools to help us migrate, and yeah.
Yay for a screen that actually lets you know what's happening.
Yeah, that's a great thing, guys.
I know it seems like so small, but it's so helpful for your frustration when you're looking at it, right?
I wanted to show this so badly to so many people, and it's like, oh, son of a. Every time we'll just sit there and spin. So,
oh no!
Oh, so sorry. Yeah,
all good.
Well, I'm glad we've
I knew you'd get to it. I was confident that it was going to get resolved because I saw it on the issues.
Great. What have you been using desktop for?
We do a lot of data telemetry coming from sensors and
cool.
a lot of edge work. So I'm actually looking at basically Qri and IPFS in general as a storage fabric for very limited resourced edge nodes for AI.
very cool. You're the third person to talk about this?
Well, I've turned IPFS on hard to the working group for Edge in Kubernetes. So
cool.
they now know about IPFS, which I'm active in that work group, and I'm also been talking to a few people about it on the side on some other issues. So yeah, we're very excited about Qri. We also have one of my previous company. Sorry, I don't want to detract from what's going on.
No, please
plug away, please.
My previous company is a company called Ping Things. You can look it up, pingthings.io or .ai. But basically, we're under a DOE RPE grant for building national infrastructure for AI on the national power grid here in North America. So we're talking about bringing in petabytes worth of sensor data that is currently deployed. Now that'll need to be, well, in this instance, it's not privatized, so we can live on the public network, but we move petabytes worth of data. So the idea of having an open set of data sets tied to that can be analyzed and stored in something like Qri is very important to us. So we're natively storing our own stuff in Ceph. So this is going to be very cool for sharing very exceedingly large data sets for us. So
cool. So I actually had to restart there. I think it was taking so long because my internet is so bad that it didn't download the migration tools quickly there, and backend was freaking out a little bit. But the migration happened. All of my old data sets are still here, my very advanced data sets. But yeah, Jari, it's really cool to hear that someone's pumped about these migration tools as I am.
Oh, I've been evangelizing the hell out of Qri, so, and IPFS in general. So
that's great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, making our day.
Yeah, I'd like to be more involved with you guys. I mean, I was glad to see the Zoom. It was just like out of the blue. I think it was a Reddit or something that I saw and I jumped on. So
that's great. Oh man, and Matthew, this is one point we should make. We do make a thing called Qri Desktop, which lets you interact with this stuff in a more simplistic way, and that's mainly targeted people who think the command line is really scary.
Right. Yeah, Roger. I was checking. I was looking at the website while we were chatting.
That's great. Cool. But yeah, and Jerry, we should really we should support this more explicitly. We had somebody jump into our Discord and ask about, hey, can we deploy Qri to edge devices and actually have it either version on device and send it up, or can we sort of piggyback onto a larger compute resource like a local? I think the person in chat on the Discord was talking about solar power collection management.
Right.
So,
oh, really?
And so we were, yeah. And so this is and one of the earliest projects that used Qri successfully was actually programmable radios and collecting and aggregating information around the positions of shipping ships that are sort of broadcasting their position via programmable radio. And so and so there are a number of folks who had actually wired up, used Qri as a library to then, and actually no, they weren't using it as a library. They were doing it entirely through command line, so basically cron jobs, but just sort of wired it up to create versions with specific naming patterns and then push those up and around. And then they had a script that was just sort of scraping and looking for that common naming pattern and then aggregating that into positional data across wherever the nodes were present.
Well, I'll show you a sensor of ours. So this is an open source box called an Open PMU, a phaser. Oh man, boy, it doesn't like that, does it?
It's not a face.
Same color as your
It's
shirt.
not a face. I'm not going to show it.
We've not trained on this data. This is
well, anyways, this is a Raspberry Pi BeagleBone sensor set made for the power industry. It's open sourced, developed by the professor of electrical engineering at Queen's Belfast in Ireland. And I've been working actively with these guys for a few years now, but this thing samples at 240 hertz. So a second, a cycle. So we're talking about a ton of data. I mean, this thing samples, this will also do point on wave. So, we're talking about a hell of a lot of data, but we're talking about a Raspberry Pi with basically nothing on board, and the BeagleBone doing the actual sampling. So the idea of having, and we don't want to load this thing up with a bunch of SSDs. We're trying to keep the cost. If you bought a commercial version of what I'm holding in my hand, it's a $50,000 device, and this thing's bill of materials is a few $100, and we sell it for $1,000. So we're saving a ton of money, but this gives us complete observability on any power grid. So that includes solar, wind, you name it. But it's really important to have something like what you guys are doing, and these data sets are the biggest problem that we have in the power industry is that the individual entities, the utilities themselves, believe that this is data that nobody should see. So does the national government in a lot of ways. But from their own concerns about who can see what data from in the utilities, they get all a little bit over crazy. But anyways, I'm distracting from this call, and I apologize. But
no,
anyways,
I don't think it's a distraction at all. It's a use case, right?
Yeah, you guys have got a lot going on, and I was super excited when I found Qri for the first time. So and IPFS.
Yeah,
that's delightful to hear.
Really, the spirit of this call is to connect with, this and the using Qri call, to connect with Qri devs and Qri users to make sure that what we're building is useful to you. So the whole purpose of the call is to be talking to you and hearing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Thanks.
No, totally. And I think there's some open conversations to be had here, specifically around sensor data, where should we be thinking about methodologies for capturing and truncating a stream and doing that on a device that is sort of purpose built towards versioning specific sort of time zones or ranges? Is that us? Is that somebody else? Should that just be something that we make sure we provide really good primitives to do? Currently, you can't just stream to standard in the body of a version, which might be a really nice sort of property to ship into our command line client. And then on top of that, there's just large questions about one of the things that we have been working on a bunch, and we're getting a lot of feedback from people who do wander into the very large data set scale, is storage management and version management becomes a very real thing. And we designed Qri from the beginning intentionally to say that you can drop versions and retain history. That's where we kept the logbook and said, okay, you actually are no longer storing the information backing this, but we at bare minimum can retain sort of the checksum that what the IPFS hash was. So should somebody actually have retained a copy offsite, But can we continue to move forward where, for resource constraints, you actually can't keep the entire history of a data set locally. So that bit's in already.
Streaming in is an interesting concept. That would be a very, very, very intriguing and solve a big problem in the power industry right now. So because these are all streaming devices and they stream at, depending on their sampling rates, they stream all this directly back to in our particular instance, basically a giant DAG, which we wrote, that was written at Berkeley, that is basically time series data. So it's all the samples as they're being pulled off the system and stored in that giant DAG.
Do you know the format of the raw data? Is it line delimited JSON? Is it CSV orientation? Like
all of the above. So there's for one thing, they transmitted a specific protocol. So the protocol is called C37.118. It's an IEEE standard. It sucks. It's like looking at a wire protocol from fucking I'm sorry about that. Anyways, I'm being jaded. Anyway, but I mean, natively, our system does JSON and some other stuff.
Gotcha.
We do the transmogrifies and whatever else transforms. Anyway, this is a rabbit hole. Let's not go down it because this thing does go way deep, and we're never going to solve the problems of that world in this call. So, but totally. I would love to get more deeply involved in the conversations you guys are having. Offline side chat kind of stuff. If there's a Slack channel or a Discord or the Discord or whatever, I would love to play. So
yeah, I'll drop a link.
Paste the Discord link. Yeah.
I'm in the Discord. So
cool.
I joined the Discord now.
Yeah, and we tried our best to avoid any sort of silos. Like the entire team actually coordinates and works on that Discord channel. We're all online there.
Great.
And to that, and the only question now is like, how do we make sure that we're properly connected to this conversation that you're facilitating in a number of other disparate places and not add more communication burden to you? And so, to that end, I'll open an issue to start the conversation about just streaming input and link that in the Discord. And
and I can bring some
ideally that'll just bring us to the same. And I think there's some questions like we have to. If we're going to do streaming input, we need to know the structure in advance. And if we're going to do that, we need to know there's some other sort of things that would be important. But it's a really interesting conversation to have, and there's no reason not to start it.
Thanks. Thank you.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a number of things that we've sort of touched on here that are all. It's nice to hear that a lot of this is either in the roadmap or something that we've heard before. It's not like totally a left field. A number of months ago that we would get.
Well, I'm glad to hear about the private side. That's a big issue, and I need to discover more about what that looks like and pricing and whatever else, just so I am a little bit more well informed on that. So, and also what does the implementation look like? But
so for us, we are intending to build, just to like signpost that a little bit. The reason it's taking a long time and it's very challenging is we actually intend to do it in a decentralized way, where we actually are building the access control layer on top of private key encryption, which is tough. The toughest thing is sort of actually managing manipulations to that access control list, the allow list and deny list themselves. And then we have all the common challenges with access control of how do I get a sufficiently powerful system for managing who can do what, while making it not so difficult, right? We have Qri Desktop at the top of the stack that needs to be able to say, hey, I want a data set and I want to use the word private. Like the word private for us doesn't mean the same thing it does, so we use encrypted. But like to an end user, it does need to be meaningful. It's like, hey, I want to make this private and I only want to give my colleague access. And that
where are you guys on monetization here? So from the standpoint of, I mean, if you guys looked at IOTA, you looked at, I mean, I think you probably know what Streamer's doing and a few of the other ones out there. Are you familiar with IOTA?
No, I'm not.
You definitely have to get involved with IOTA. IOTA is basically an alliance out of Europe, and it's getting machine-to-machine support for data set monetization. So
cool.
So you basically can hook to they have a crypto. It's called Myota. They are currently in bed with a whole lot of big people like Jaguar, and but take a look at the IOTA alliance, and then you might want to muck around with the idea of adding an API call to actually transact on that DAG. So.
Absolutely. I mean, and at least giving others who want to do this the option to do so.
And again, that's all machine to machine, which does nothing more than open up, the value proposition of more people storing on Qri, and especially if you have direct embed interaction with IOTA.
Question, is that iota.org?
I believe it is iota.org, O-R-G. Yeah.
Yep.
They should all they be talking about is their massive DAG that is more performant than a blockchain. And again, you can find the actual currency as MIOTA on the actual exchanges. So but I got to tell you, this is not some fly by night. This is a massively in fact, it's under the object management group. Is who's actually running this thing as part of it, and it's also CNCF. So definitely, I think you guys should interrogate IOTA. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for the tip. We'll definitely start doing some looking at that.
No, I mean, I would do it. I would look on my own. I mean, we already do IOTA, and
yeah,
that's what was going to be my next kind of foray into seeing how we could do it. But
yeah, for us, I can tell you what our current plans for monetization are, because it's worth actually noting those. The way that we sort of plan to make money is by selling cloud services that help when centralization is a necessity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So situations where you want API access to the entire sort of registry of stored data sets at a really high throughput, just allowing an end customer to say, cool, here's a credit card, here's an API rate, and I can pay for access.
IOTA's business plan will look very familiar to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Obviously, they have a giant DAG, and they basically have their nodes, and they basically offer up the ability to have a high performance node that they'll service for you. So on.
Totally.
It'll be a very familiar business plan, but you guys should dovetail very nicely into that one.
Oh, great.
So
this is delightful. Yeah, that's and just to sort of, I do feel the need to give a formal answer when we talk about monetization as the sort of.
And I was really talking about monetization of data owners versus how you guys are going to monetize.
Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah, and for us, we are of the view that we're trying to create our prime goal is to create a facilitated data commons, right? Which is not necessarily something that we own. And so we think that if users are able to monetize their data, that's great. And that's awesome. For us, we sort of see the data set exchange that Qri is trying to facilitate as something of a barter system where anybody can sort of give and take for free, so long as they're willing to sort of, A, not publish data that is harmful to others, and B, are able to collaborate in meaningful ways. One of those ways is just spin up a peer-to-peer node, and now you can download it however much you want for free.
I'm sure you guys have. Do you guys have an outreach? I mean, do you guys actually do individual outreaches to companies that you think might be valuable to the ecosystem? Because I can give you one that I think you guys should talk to.
Absolutely,
it's a company. Okay, great. And it's already public data sets. They're massive. It's a very cool company out of Alameda, San Francisco. It's called Saildrone.
Oh, cool.
Saildrone. They basically make autonomous drone sailing vehicles that have sailed around Antarctic, all over the world, cool. And they basically are telemetry acquisition systems for mapping the ocean, all the different types of values that they want out of the ocean. Temperature, weather, wind, salinity, the bottom. I mean, it's amazing, but they publish all their data sets. But unless you know about them, you'd never find their data set. And this is that, of course, we know that's the big problem. So those types of companies would be big wins. So
awesome. Thank you. I just went to their website and I have the word bathymetry is new to me.
Yeah, bathymetry.
I've learned a word today, so I'm delighted.
Yeah, I play in the aquaculture space, and I play in the new space arena. So CubeSat satellites and things like that. So, which is another interesting area for IPFS and some stuff like that. So,
totally cool. Well, we have 2 minutes till what is my 3 o'clock, but maybe others top of the hour. Does anybody have any closing questions?
No, I mean, I think Jerry opened up the floodgates there, but
again, guys, I get like this, and I apologize.
No, it's all good.
Now I'm thinking about putting in an issue request for some federated learning, so I can move my compute to your data, and the registry would be great.
There's some overlap here, yeah. But yeah, let's definitely continue the discussion online. I think we've got a number of things to file issues about.
I'm in Discord, so cool. Yes, I would love to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate your questions. Jonas, we really hope you'll join us on the RFC if you have time. Matthew, if you have any questions about sort of how we can best fit to your company's needs, we would love to chat.
Definitely stay in touch for sure.
Yeah, cool. If you can't get it, if you retain nothing else, hello@qri.io will send to people who are watching that email. And then beyond that, it's really appreciated. Thank you so much for joining the call, everybody.
You bet.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Our next calls too.
Thank you.